Thank you, Chris, and thank you to all of you for coming. There are some more handouts. If you need a handout. So in the paper today then, I'm going to be aiming for the heart of Jacques Rancière's work. That's to say, for his particular understanding of equality. My objectives are to try to clarify what he means by equality and to evaluate the particular form of emancipatory egalitarianism which his thought constitutes. My elucidatory approach will be neither oblique nor comprehensive. I'm going to be concentrating in the main on what I consider to be the two most important texts, that's to say, Le Maître Ignorant and La Mésentente. In the book I've just written on Rancière's work, you'll find a rather different kind of analysis of his thought, one which is certainly more comprehensive and contextualizing, but that account's also one which avoids delving too deeply into his particular understanding of equality. And that might sound like a scandalous admission or omission, or scandalous admission of an omission, but I think it's defensible if you want me to defend it later. What I'm trying to say, though, is that the paper today is not simply a recapitulation of part of the book, but what I'm seeking to do is to exert a more intense downward analytical pressure on what is without question the central concern of Rancière's work, equality. What I'll try to do as well is to go some way towards elaborating a synthetic or systematic, or a contextualized and developmental account of it. As I build my own synthetic account of Rancièrean equality over the course of the paper, I'm going to be engaging closely with the only other sustained account of its kind to date. That's to say, the interpretation of Rancière's conception of equality elaborated by Todd May in two recent books. And I'll also be attempting to go some way towards laying to rest some enduring misconceptions of Rancière's egalitarian politics. So in aiming for the heart of Rancière's thought, my hope is, as in Sergio Leone's A Fistful of Dollars, for those of you who know that film, the target of my inquiry, his concept of equality, will emerge from the encounter all the stronger for the confrontation. I want to begin then with 6 rapid-fire quotations which, taken together, give some sense of the uncertainty surrounding Rancière's work, and uncertainty which I want to try to dispel in the paper today. The first is from Didier Eribon. In an interview about his autobiography, Eribon's Retour à Reims from 2009, a book described by Annie Ernaux in a review as Le Coming Out Social de Didier Eribon, because in it he owns up to his working-class family background. Eribon makes, in an interview about that book, he makes the following remarks. Quand je lis un auteur comme Jacques Rancière, par exemple, et que je constate que tout son discours depuis 40 ans se résume, que dit-il d'autre? Rien. À une exaltation populiste d'une sorte de savoir politique, culturel, scientifique, spontané de la classe ouvrière, de compétences égales de tous avec tous, je ressens de la colère et du dégoût. Il est un cas typique du penseur bourgeois qui se penche de haut sur le peuple, qui ne rencontre jamais ailleurs que dans des livres du XIXe siècle, et qui fantasme sur les gens qu'il ne connaît pas. My second quotation is from Jean-Philippe Deranty's very helpful edited volume entitled Jacques Rancière, Key Concepts, which was published earlier this year. Unlike the great majority of his colleagues, some of whom were to become important official figures in the Fifth Republic's establishment, Rancière has always remained true to the fundamental idea of radical equality. His whole work is characterized by the consistent attempt to scrupulously follow the implications of the idea that human beings are equal in all respects. My third quotation is from Yves Citon's chapter in that same volume, in which he characterizes the political and theoretical message, as he calls it, of Rancière's work. It commands all the master thinkers, academics, experts, and other well-wishers of the working classes to stop pontificating about them from above and to simply let them speak, hear their voices, trust their capacity to spell out their needs and aspirations. My fourth quotation is from Todd May's more recent book on Rancière's work, more recent of his two books, I mean. In Rancière's thought, the idea of equality can be an elusive one. My fifth, if you'll forgive me from quoting myself, albeit in a spirit of autocritique, is the first half of the first sentence of my own recent book, Jacques Rancière, the philosopher of equality. The sixth and last quotation, for the moment anyway, is from the afterword to a special issue on Rancière and queer theory, in which Adrian Rifkin writes with trenchant tentativeness of Rancière's thought that Jacotisme is possibly the only enduring principle of all his work. What Rifkin terms here Rancière's Jacotisme is another name for his distinctive conception of equality, one which helpfully foregrounds its origins in his meditation on the work of maverick pedagogue Joseph Jacotot, whom he discusses in the text Le Maître Ignorant, a text to which I'm going to come in the second half of the paper today. What's distinctive about Rancière's conception of equality, his Jacotisme, according to Todd May's interpretation, is that it is a conception of what May calls active as opposed to passive equality. The term active equality is not one that Rancière ever uses himself, nor indeed is the other adjective in my paper title, declarative, although Rancière often writes nominally about declarations of equality and verbally about declaring equality. As I'll go on to show, this is because I think he's interested mainly in an egalitarianism of acts and processes. The picture of Rancière's work, which emerges from those 6 quotations, is intriguing in the extent of the confusion and uncertainty it suggests, both analytically and evaluatively. In analytical or interpretive terms, is it not more than a little surprising that Todd May, in his second book on Rancière's work, should still be seeing fit to remark on the elusivity of the very concept he spent his first book analysing, a concept which he thinks quite rightly, in my view, is central to Rancière's work. If May's confession that Rancièrean equality remains elusive is surprising, the question-begging genitive in my own opening sentence allowed me to postpone asking what kind of equality Rancière was the philosopher. So I promised limited autocritique. In Rifkin's tentative formulation, why is equality only possibly the only enduring principle of his work? Are there not other principles? How can there be such uncertainty and such tentativeness about its main concern? The fact that equality is clearly held to be important in Rancière's work, and yet at the same time there's such confusion over precisely what kind of equality we're talking about, may well be part and parcel of what Alex Kalinikos has called the confusion in contemporary thinking about equality, particularly on the left. Nevertheless, my conviction is that beneath whatever confusion Rancière's writing may have engendered, his work contains all the elements of a highly distinctive and singularly potent form of egalitarian thinking, which is generally lacking from wider public debate on the subject, as indeed it is from Kalinikos' own book on equality. So as far as the overall meaning and value of Rancière's work are concerned, Eribon on the one hand and Deranty and Citon on the other seem to have diametrically opposed and irreconcilable views. In a paper I gave earlier this year, I argued that Eribon's reaction is premised on a misunderstanding of Rancière's work, although I'd hesitate, for reasons I explained in that paper, to call it a misreading. I quote Eribon's comments here because they offer a succinct and forceful expression of one particularly tenacious caricature of Rancière's work. Although I'll not unpick this caricature once again in the paper today, that it is a caricature should be clear by the time that I've finished. My own view of Rancière's distinctive conception of equality, his Jacotisme, is that it possesses quite remarkable emancipatory force, but that the obscurity and the literariness with which it's formulated, particularly in Le Maître Ignorant, impedes comprehension, even as it makes for an engaging read, and it is a very engaging book. What I'm therefore proposing to undertake here is a distinctly un-Rancièrean exercise, that's to say, a work of explanatory exegesis. That such an approach amounts to a kind of conceptual policing and is contrary, certainly, to the feeling tone of some of Rancière's writing, is something of which I'm aware. Nevertheless, I still think there's a pressing need for such work, not perhaps as an end in itself, but as a way of making his writing more readily available for reappropriation in egalitarian political struggle. Todd May's synthetic account of Rancièrean equality is certainly a step in the right direction. along this clarificatory path, but it's flawed in several important respects, which I'm going to simply list here and return to periodically as I outline my own view of Rancière's jacotisme. I'm going to list them here because I'm not going to have time to return to all of them, only to some of them, I'm afraid. In my view, May's mistaken to argue that Rancière's view necessarily implies non-violent struggle, even if Rancière himself shies away from the whole question of violence. May consistently overemphasises Rancière's continuity with part of the anarchist tradition. Most seriously of all, he relies on a distinction, May relies on a distinction between active and passive equality, which, while it tries to articulate something which is certainly distinctive about Rancière's work, is reductive to the point of depriving that work of its capacity to account for egalitarian struggle in any situation of relative social complexity. The extreme formalism of May's reworking of Rancière's political writing leaves Rancière's work vulnerable to right-wing, indeed, more especially to far-right reappropriation. Finally, in his eagerness to endorse the distinctive character of Rancière's work, May, in my view, misrepresents the difference between Rancière's position and that of other important theoretical work on equality from the Anglo-American tradition of egalitarian liberalism. Following on from this last criticism of May's account, let me now begin to elaborate my own analytical reconstruction of Rancière's jacotisme by situating his distinctive concern with equality in relation to that of some other leading philosophical or theoretical work on the subject. Amartya Sen's work is perhaps the most nuanced and, in policy terms, certainly the most influential representative of the Anglo-American tradition's engagement with equality. Sen has argued that when it comes to theories of equality, the decisive question is not whether or not equality is important, but rather what kind of equality is under discussion. As Sen puts it, the key question is equality of what? This is the crucial question, Sen argues, because almost all normative theories of social arrangement involve at some level a demand for equality of something, of some property which that theory values as essential for a good life. This is the case at any rate with any theory of social arrangement which does not presume from the outset that some people are innately entitled to live better, more fulfilled lives than other people. In other words, any theory which does not hold to some variant of the understandably controversial Aristotelian thesis that some people are slaves by nature. As Sen puts it, I'm quoting him here, every normative theory of social arrangement that has at all stood the test of time seems to demand equality of something. The attempt to answer the question equality of what has preoccupied the leading Anglo-American philosophers of equality since the 1970s, Rawls, Nozick, Dworkin, Sen himself, Scanlon and Cohen, to name a few, all of whom have been concerned in different ways with the way in which principles for particular social arrangements, or what they tend to call distribution,